and welcome to episode 10 of the Primary Maths Podcast, the show where we talk all things primary maths. I'm Jon Cripwell.
And I'm Becky Brown.
And I appear to be wearing exactly the same outfit as I was wearing last week, Becky, but you still got your tan from your recent holiday, but you have at least managed to change your clothes in the preceding 7 days, so well done. But for people watching rather than listening, you might get what we're on about there. Anyway, welcome along to episode 10. We've made it to double figures, Becky.
Wow.
I know. Never thought we'd see the day. Thought somebody would have pulled us off air by now, but no. We're still here, still going strong, still finding mathsy things to talk about. So what are we going to be talking about today, Becky?
So today, Jon, we are going to be celebrating maths leadership, the joys and the tribulations that come alongside it, whether you desperately wanted to be a maths lead or maybe got handed it because nobody else wanted it, but what it means to be a maths lead and how we can support each other in what is quite a difficult position.
Absolutely. I've just about recovered from last week's conversation where we talked about, well, the maths of life was all about temperature, but then our conversation, which I definitely needed a lie down for afterwards, was all about how to teach time to younger children, thinking particularly about the progression from that very early conceptual understanding of time and you know what came before and what comes after, all the way through to being able to calculate with time and things. So if you missed that episode, feel free to go back and have a listen.
Yeah, my head is still hurting a week later, Jon, having talked about time and really pulling apart what is involved in the teaching of time, particularly using analog clock.
So well, time does seem to have flown this week, Becky. I have to say, it only seemed like 5 minutes ago that we were recording that episode. But you know, that's the magic of podcasting for you.
Absolutely. It's sped by. So before we talk about maths leadership then, Jon, have you got something to share for this week's Maths of Life?
Of course I have, because I've had yet another conversation. Try to limit it to once a week, but I have had a conversation with my children this week. And this time we were in a shop and we were looking, obviously, at the bargain aisle because that's where I sort of naturally navigate to in a shop. And we noticed that there was some discount products with percentages on them. And my eldest daughter, who's 12, she sort of asked, you know, why are these all in percentages rather than in fractions? I think possibly because at school we'd spent a lot of time looking at fractions in Key Stage 2, probably slightly less time looking at percentages. And I thought that was a great question, actually. So why is it that we seem to prefer percentages over fractions when it comes to working out discounts and things like that?
Yeah, that is a great question, because you could argue that you could survive quite happily without percentages at all, couldn't you? If you've got a good understanding of fractions, why use them at all?
Well, absolutely. I mean, some percentages are really tricky to work out, aren't they? Whereas, you know, some fractional equivalents can be quite straightforward. So, yeah, I thought it was a great question. I thought it was a great question to go away and do a little bit of research on and come back with some answers. And then I can direct her to this podcast episode to listen and find out for herself because, you know, that's the kind of father I am. Plus, it all helps with our listening figures, which are really important. So, percentages. Where did they come from? Well, going to take you back in time, Becky, again.
I was waiting for it, Jon.
Yep. Back through the mists of time and hopping over to Italy again, because, you know, why wouldn't you want to hop over to ancient Rome, where we are going to be thinking about the Roman number system, which, as we know, didn't have decimals, but it did have fractions. And particularly, they had a bit of a thing for hundredths. So, for example, the Emperor Augustus once introduced a tax of 1/100th of goods sold at auctions. Now, I'm going to do my best at a little bit of Latin here, Becky. This tax was called Centesima Rerum Venilium. Sound like a genuine ancient Roman, don't I? And I'll translate that for you. I know you don't need it translating, Becky, but some of our listeners may not have had a classical education. It means the hundredths of the things being sold. A hundredth of the things being sold. So even without decimals or modern maths, even back 2,000-3,000 years ago, the Romans were already thinking in percentages. They just didn't call it that yet. The actual term percentages, we have to fast forward to sort of medieval merchants. So money was becoming more standardized across Europe. Trade was booming, and suddenly people needed a better way to do calculations on profit, loss, and importantly, of course, tax. So that's when fractions with a denominator of 100 became the go-to. So they'd already had it around since the Roman times, but this is where it really became a percentage. So by the late 1400s, arithmetic texts across Europe were teaching people how to calculate interest rates, profit margins, and the classic rule of three. So that by the 17th century, it was standard to quote interest in hundredths, and the idea of percentum for every 100 was fully established. So I don't know about you, Becky, but whenever I've introduced percentages to year 5 or year 6 children, I've always broken down what the word actually means, per cent, and thinking about that root word cent relating to 100 and per, for every or of every, just to sort of help that conceptual understanding a little bit. Where did the percentage symbol come from, I hear you ask?
That is exactly what I was thinking, John.
I could tell by the look on your face, Becky. That comes from Renaissance Italy, where merchants used percento, which then got shortened to p-cento, then pc, then p/, and eventually the p dropped off as well, and the cento morphed into two circles with a slash. So that's how it sort of evolved over time, which doesn't seem like a natural progression, does it? But that's where it came from. So that little percent symbol on your orange juice bottle or on your wine bottle, if you prefer, it's basically shorthand for every 100, take this much off, essentially.
Oh, I never thought about the percentage symbol before, but I love that little
fact. I guess when I've thought about it like a fractional symbol, but it turns out it's not really where that relationship came from at all. So interesting. Now, this is the bit that I think in recent years has become a bit of a meme and has blown people's minds a little bit. The fact that the percentages are commutative. So you can find, if you find 8% of 25, you can flip it around to find 25% of 8, and you'll end up with the same answer. So 8% of 25 is obviously a little more tricky to do. So if you want an easier way, you can flip it around so that you can find 25% of 8, which is 2. It's nice and easy. Why does that work? It's a little bit difficult to explain without some representations and maybe a pictorial diagram, but I'll do my very best. So when you calculate A% of B, you're really doing A times B divided by 100. That's what you're doing. And since the multiplication part of that is commutative, you can flip the numbers around and it still gives you the same product. So A percentage of B is the same as B percentage of A. As long as that multiplication stays the same, it's fine. So 3% of 10 is the same as 10% of 3, 4% of 75 is the same as 75% of 4. And that's just a really handy shortcut, I think, when you're in the shops and you're trying to work things out, or if you're trying to help children find an easier way to solve a percentage problem, applying the commutative principle is really important.
Yeah, it's great, John, and I love that you've explained why it happened, because I think there are lots of affectionately named maths hacks out there, aren't there? But actually, when you understand why it works and what the maths is, I think it's even more exciting. I mean, maybe that's just the maths in me, but
no, I think you're right. It does annoy me slightly when some of these maths hacks are presented without any reasoning why they work, because it could just be coincidence, couldn't it? And actually, maybe it only works once or twice with the numbers that you've chosen. I want to know why something works.
Yeah.
Anyway, I know the next question you're going to ask, Becky, and I'll save your breath. You were going to say, so why do we use percentages rather than fractions in shops?
Yeah.
To show discounts. So here we have to go into psychology a little bit, which is not my area of expertise, but I have done some research, obviously. So apparently we think that we understand percentages better for some reason as adults. I do wonder whether this is going to change with the sort of focus that we've had on fractions in recent years in Key Stage 2 and Key Stage 3. But currently, or certainly when this research was conducted, percentages apparently felt more accessible than fractions did. And I suppose 60% is maybe, I don't know, is that easier to calculate than its fractional equivalent? I don't know. But people feel happier with that rather than with 6/10, for example.
Yeah, you don't, when people talk about not liking maths and things they struggle with, they always mention fractions, don't they? Normally fractions and algebra, I didn't ever like that. You don't generally hear people saying that about percentages. So maybe people do prefer percentages generally.
Yeah.
That does make sense.
And then the other one's the classic thing that 25 looks bigger than 1. So if you want to show that it's a really good discount, 25% looks better than 1/4, 1/4, just because the numbers, the numerals, I should say, are larger in value, even though they mean obviously the same amount. So 25% off just looks better than 1/4 off. And it's that classic shop psychology that you think you're getting a bigger bargain than you really are. So for our short conversation this week, I wanted to touch on a subject that is very dear to my heart, which is maths leadership. Over the years, I've been really lucky to have been a maths leader in a couple of different primary schools. And I've also worked with dozens of maths leaders at various trusts and through the maths hubs and things. And so I know how varied and challenging the role can be, but also how you've really got an opportunity to drive meaningful change in a setting, and really have a huge impact on the children and the staff that work there. Because obviously maths is a subject that tends to be taught every day. So the decisions that you make with your colleagues as a maths leader can have an impact right across the school and upon the daily lives of the children and the staff at that school. I wanted to take the opportunity, Becky, during the summer to celebrate maths leaders and also to reassure anybody who may have found out on the last day of term as they were breaking up for the summer that next year you've got the enviable job of being the maths leader at your school. I wanted to reassure those people that it's something to look forward to, something to cherish, and not something to be scared of, and that there's a lot of support out there. So, were you a maths leader at your school, Becky?
I was a maths lead, in a very large junior school, 5 form entry. So I haven't done it in a situation where I've had to lead maths alongside 3 or 4 other subjects, so I could just focus on maths, which I know is very difficult in a smaller school. You don't necessarily have that luxury. I loved leading maths. I loved it. I think people look at maths as it's very static, and maths is maths. But once you start unpicking it, you realise that is absolutely not the case. And the discussions you can have around maths with children, I love it. But with staff, I loved delivering CPD and having discussions and learning. I mean, I speak to people often, teachers, and I don't lead maths now, but people know that maths is my love, so will often talk to me about maths. And I think I learn a lot from other teachers who maybe aren't as confident at maths as I am. I think sometimes if you're really confident at something, you can just do it without thinking about it. And it's only when someone says, well, actually, I don't really understand that, or, well, I thought about teaching it this way, you think, actually, I hadn't thought about that because it just came automatically to me. But I think having those discussions, you don't have to be confident and good at maths to promote those discussions and learn things from each other. And I think that's part of the value, isn't it, of being a subject lead, that you can really get into the nitty gritty of it. And I love, as you know, love talking about maths all the time, John. So it suited me.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was maths lead as well. I was maths lead my entire teaching career. So at my first school that I worked at during my NQT year, as it was before there were ECT years, you had a 1-year NQT year, newly qualified teacher. You weren't supposed to lead a subject, but they didn't have anybody to lead maths. So they thought it would be great for my professional development to lead maths. I, as you know, didn't think of myself as a maths person at that time. and I thought I would have been much better suited to leading English. That's what I wanted to lead, but there was already a fantastic English lead at the school. So when it was put to me, I sort of took the opportunity. I think I did have a choice. I think I did have a choice because it was my NQT year. I wasn't supposed to be doing it anyway, but I was, with some trepidation, glad to accept it, and never looked back really. I don't know about you, Becky, but when I first started leading maths, so there wasn't the range of support in place that there is now. So over the last 10 years, as everybody will be aware, the math subs have been put in place, and there's some fantastic support there. Here at Twinkl, we run regular CPD sessions through our TeachMeets and through Twinkl PD. Actually, this is probably an opportunity to plug a TeachMeet that I'll be running in September the 25th at 4 p.m. for anybody new to leading maths. It's totally free. Come along and we'll talk through some of the practical things that you might want to consider if this is your first time or if you're coming back to leading maths. I'll put some details about that in the show notes as well. But I think right now is a great time to be a maths lead, because there is a huge amount of support out there to access, and you're very much not on your own. Whereas when I was sort of thrown at the deep end, it was there were no schemes, certainly not any that anybody was keen to use anyway, and it was sort of find out the best way to do things. Fortunately, it wasn't too long before Teaching for Mastery came along, and the math subs came along, and I was involved in quite the early stages of that. But just because I was looking for some help, really. So that's what I thought we could sort of talk about this week, was just the things, the challenges, but also the opportunities, and where people can look to for some support if they are a maths lead. And as you say, Becky, they could be wearing multiple hats. I think, as well as being maths lead in that first job, I was also computing lead and science lead, which was quite a lot. Yeah. When I moved to my next primary school, I moved there as assistant head and maths lead. And although I had a few other SLT sort of roles, I didn't have any other subjects to lead, which was a relief.
And there always will be overlap in subject leadership generally, won't there? You've got to do the same sorts of things. But maths, as you said before, is taught every day. There is a big lack of confidence generally. There's a lot of anxiety around maths. And I think that is the biggest barrier, actually. I think once you get those conversations going and get people, tapping into the hive mind across a school, no matter how big it is, and thinking about involving the whole community, you can sort of combat that a little bit, but it is always going to be quite tricky. And as you said, the maths hubs were invaluable to me, and I know that there's a lot out there. Sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming just how much support there is, but better than that, as you said, sort of fumbling around in the dark and not really knowing where to start. So your Teach Me sounds like a great idea, Jon, for anybody new to maths leadership in September.
Yeah, I hope so. Genuinely, I just thought what I've wanted as a maths lead. And I thought, an opportunity to start to look ahead to the year and plan out what I might want to do as a maths lead over the course of that year. Because as we're recording this, it's the summer holidays. Hopefully people aren't thinking too much about September. But if you do have a leadership role in school, then it might be that you are thinking about, what am I going to put on that action plan? What am I going to do in September? How am I going to show that I've had an impact by, the following summer term? And we know, don't we, at the start of the year, it feels like a long time. It feels like a long time to, all these different weeks that we've got between September and July. It seems to go on forever. But actually, I know when I get to July and I look back and I think, blimey, where's that time gone? I had all these ideas that I wanted to do, and I've managed to do about a fifth of them. So, having a plan, a realistic plan, I think is really important. But if you are new to the role, particularly, I think the first thing you probably want to do is just assess where the school is at the moment, what's working really well, what is it that you really want to affect change in? And to do that, you probably need to do a learning walk, talk to some children, talk to the staff. I was talking last week, actually, Becky, you won't have heard it yet, but I was talking to Sally about how as a leader, some of those informal conversations that you have with staff in corridors and staff rooms and things are actually often the most insightful ones.
Yeah, definitely. You saying it like that, John, it sounds very exciting. The thought of a whole year ahead and thinking about where you're going to go and what you're going to find out makes me want to do it all over again. A tiny bit.
A tiny bit, yeah. Yeah, it is exciting though. I think it is. That it's nice to look at something with whether you're a new maths lead or a returning maths lead. There's a fresh start available in September, isn't there, to really affect change. And it might be in your school that maths is a priority, and you're going to have a lot of time and support put in place to help drive change in your school. Or it might be that actually this year it's one of the lesser subjects like writing or reading that's going to have the priority this year. And actually, your job is going to be to maintain standards in maths or look for particular groups of children that you might want to try and raise the profile of a little bit. But whatever you're doing, I think starting with really getting to grips with where the school is right now in terms of maths, what's working really well, what could be improved upon. And as you say, Becky, which staff are feeling really confident about teaching maths and which ones might need or might benefit from a little bit of support, either from yourself or from attending some training through Maths Hubs or even through ourselves. Again, we've got some great training for TAs and for ECTs and things. And there's a whole archive actually of fantastic free training for subscribers on the Twinkl website as well, isn't there?
There is, yes. Lots of teacher meets have happened that might, in a particular area that you're interested in, or you want to take something for a staff meeting, there's lots out there. I think subject leadership can be difficult because there are lots and lots of boxes to tick, aren't there? And I think I've alluded to it already, but I think that maths culture is one that can sometimes get mixed off because it's difficult to measure, but it probably will have a positive impact on all of the other things that you're measuring. If you could just think about, I mean, it depends, but you might be in a school where maths isn't celebrated. It can be a tiny thing like maths of the week, competition of the week, some healthy maths displays, just something to try to raise the profile of maths can be an easy start because it's not so data driven. It could be something you can do to get people excited about it before you get into the nitty gritty, if you have time. Because I know before we know it, it'll be October half term and it will be already halfway through.
I think one of the first things I did was, as you say, introduced a maths competition, but one that children did at home with their parents, because I also wanted to drive parental engagement in maths as well. And it was simple things like that could be done across the school from EYFS right up to year 6, such as, take a camera phone outside with you and find some interesting shapes and photograph them, or repeating patterns, or those sorts of things. It doesn't have to be number heavy, does it? You can do creative things with maths as well, but ways that you can, as you say, raise the profile of the subject whilst also trying to engage children and parents and staff in talking about maths and looking for maths. Go away and listen to a maths podcast, maybe, that sort of thing. But yeah, just looking for opportunities to, as you say, start to develop the culture of the school so that people are talking positively about the subject rather than...
And I think it's interesting you've mentioned parental engagement. I've been talking to lots of customers while we've been talking about some new products that we're working on at the moment. They were all maths leads, and almost all of them said that prior to COVID, they had done maths workshops and parents had come in, but it hadn't really picked back up again. But actually, that is really valuable, getting families in and really, increasing that engagement in a kind of a fun and creative way, more than like you say, it doesn't have to be number heavy. There's plenty of maths out there, as we know, we talk about it every week, that doesn't have to be number focused, and it can be quite fun.
One of the best in terms of take up, although it was slightly scary to introduce, was that we had open classrooms once a year. So we'd have a week. Parents had to sign up so that you weren't going to suddenly have 30 parents in your classroom. But for sort of 3 or 4 mornings in 1 week, parents could sign up to come and spend 15 or 20 minutes at the start of a maths lesson working with their child in the classroom. And that was great because it got parents in, it got them involved, it got them to see what a maths lesson looked like. And it wasn't a an after-school thing where staff had to put on extra things to do because we know that time is tight, and it was just realistic. So that's that. I want to say an easy way. It is an easy way, but it can be a little bit intimidating as well, I suppose. But it worked really well for us for a number of years. And the feedback from parents was always very positive and very appreciative. And the children really look forward to the parents coming in as well. So again, I know it's not something that necessarily works in every setting, and you have to think about, potential pitfalls and safeguarding issues and those sorts of things. But you can make it work. And as I say, it was a valuable way to engage parents. So whether you are brand new to maths leadership or you're an old hand at steering your school through the trials and tribulations of the maths curriculum, we'd love you to stick with us here on the Primary Maths Podcast, where we'll be bringing you all the latest developments in maths pedagogy and speaking to some fantastic guests to share their insights into the best ways to teach primary maths. Those full episodes will be starting again in September. In the meantime, we've been having and enjoying these summer specials, more sort of bite-sized episodes for you to enjoy over the summer. As ever, we would love you to follow us on social media. You can find us on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on TikTok, where you can see Becky doing the latest TikTok dance crazes. And you can also, of course, drop us a follow on YouTube and on Apple and Spotify. In fact, if you could go and follow us on all of those platforms right now, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you once again